The red wine hits Janet Miller's face like a baptism in humiliation. Cold Chianti dripping from her braided hair onto the white marble floor of the Lucchese estate. 300 silk-draped witnesses holding their champagne flutes in suspended horror. Angela Scarfo stands above her, diamonds catching chandelier light. That $80,000 Vera Wang gown gleaming like armor. Manicured hands still clutching the empty crystal. The words come out loud enough for the orchestra to hear. That's what happens when the help forgets their place. But Angela doesn't know three things. She doesn't know that Bernardo Lucchese, New Jersey's most dangerous man, her husband of exactly 2 hours, is watching from the ballroom entrance with murder in his eyes. She doesn't know that in 90 seconds, he'll do something that will shatter this wedding, humiliate the Scarfo crime family in front of every boss from Atlantic City to Boston, and ignite a war that will leave bodies in the Hudson. And she definitely doesn't know that the trembling black woman standing before her with wine soaking through her uniform isn't just a maid. Janet Miller is the daughter of Jimmy, the accountant, Miller, the man who kept the books for 5 crime families before someone put 2 bullets in his head when Janet was 7 years old. The same Jimmy Miller who hid $47 million in offshore accounts that the families have been searching for since 1998. But Janet doesn't know that yet either. Some secrets stay buried until the exact moment they're needed. Right now, all Janet knows is that her hands are shaking. Her daughter Maya is with a babysitter 2 miles away, and if she loses this $4,500 a month job, they're back to sleeping in her Honda Civic by the end of November. So she does what she's perfected in 26 years of foster homes and minimum wage humiliation. She makes herself smaller, invisible, silent. The ballroom laughs. Not everyone, but enough. Then Bernardo's voice cuts through the crowd like a knife through silk. What the hell is going on here? Before we continue with Janet's story, can I ask you something? I spend 15 to 20 hours researching, writing, and perfecting each story for you. That's nearly a full week of work to create these cinematic experiences completely free. While you're here enjoying this story, YouTube only shows it to a tiny fraction of people unless you take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe. Here's the thing. If just half of you watching right now subscribe, this channel would explode, and I could create even deeper, more complex stories for you every single week. But only about 3% of viewers are subscribed. That means 97% of you are enjoying hours of content, but haven't taken that tiny step. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a single click that tells YouTube, show this to more people. So here's my request. If you're enjoying Janet's story so far, click subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and means everything to this channel's survival. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing this global community we're building. Last video, we had viewers from 47 different countries. Now, let's get back to the story, because what happens next changes everything for Janet. 6 months earlier, Janet had walked through the iron gates of 847 Riverside Drive with a resume that listed 3 references and 0 red flags. Mrs. Hunter, the estate manager, had been very specific during the interview. Mr. Lucchese values 3 things: discretion, efficiency, and invisibility. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak to no one about what happens in this house. Janet had perfected invisibility at age 7. The night 2 men in expensive suits came to her childhood home in Camden and made her father kneel in the kitchen. She'd watched through the banister slats as they'd asked him questions about numbers, accounts, passwords. Her father, always so careful with his wire-rimmed glasses and his ledgers, had said nothing. Just looked at little Janet hiding upstairs and mouthed, "I love you, baby girl." The gunshots had sounded like firecrackers. After that came the foster homes. 7 of them. Then aging out of the system at 18 with $200 and a social worker who said, "Good luck, sweetie," like those words meant something. Then Maya's father, who disappeared the morning Janet peed on that pregnancy test stick. Then 3 years of survival mode. Waitressing, cleaning houses, doing whatever it took to keep her daughter fed. The Lucchese job was salvation. 12-bedroom mansion for $1,500 monthly salary. Health insurance for the first time since she was a child. She cleaned like her life depended on it, because it did. She memorized Bernardo's preferences. Coffee at exactly 185 degrees. Fresh white roses in the entrance hall every Monday. His newspapers ironed flat. She learned the rhythm of the house, the language of expensive silence. Bernardo himself barely noticed her. He was a gravitational force in tailored suits, conducting business in rapid Italian, leaving at dawn and returning near midnight. When he did acknowledge her, it was with the distant courtesy powerful men show furniture. Then Angela Scarfo arrived on a Tuesday in April, stepping from Mercedes in a white silk dress that cost more than Janet made in 4 months. The kitchen staff whispered the truth. Victor Scarfo controlled the Elizabeth ports. This wasn't romance. This was empire building, a merger of territories and bloodlines. Angela treated the estate like conquered land from day one, rearranging furniture, firing staff members for imagined slights, inspecting Janet's work with the cruelty of someone who'd never had to work for anything. "These windows have streaks," Angela would say, knowing they didn't. "The towels are folded wrong." They weren't. "Is this really your best?" Always that edge, that reminder that Janet existed only at her pleasure. Janet redid perfect work without complaint. She learned at 7 years old that survival meant swallowing your pride. She'd eaten from dumpsters while pregnant with Maya. She could handle a spoiled rich girl's power games. But Angela wasn't satisfied with compliance. She wanted breaking. One July morning, Janet was arranging white roses when Angela descended the stairs in yoga pants worth more than Janet's rent. She watched Janet work for 30 seconds, then swept her hand across the marble table. The vase exploded. Water and glass and crushed petals everywhere. "How clumsy of me," Angela said, voice dripping honey. "Clean it up, Janet. Do try to be more careful with Mr. Lucchese's things." Janet got on her hands and knees and picked up every shard while Angela watched, smiling. That night, Janet lay in her studio apartment with Maya, sleeping beside her, and calculated. How much humiliation could she endure? What was the exchange rate between dignity and dinner? Between pride and keeping the lights on? The math always came out the same. She'd survive. She always did. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Hunter had mentioned Angela's behavior to Bernardo 3 times. That he'd listened with half his attention while negotiating territory disputes and shipment schedules. That he'd told himself it would settle down after the wedding. That he had bigger problems, that staff management wasn't his concern. He was wrong about that. The wedding day arrived October 12th with golden autumn light and $2 million in decorations transforming the estate into something from magazine spread. 300 guests, 12-piece orchestra, a cake that cost more than Janet's annual salary. Angela had spared no expense because this was her coronation, marrying into the Lucchese name, becoming untouchable. Janet worked from 5 a.m., coordinating caterers and florists, staying invisible in her pressed white uniform. Maya was with the neighbor, probably eating chicken nuggets and watching cartoons, safe and oblivious to the world her mother navigated. The ceremony was perfect. Angela floated down the garden aisle in that obscene dress, looking like every bridal fantasy ever photographed. Bernardo stood at the altar in his tuxedo, face carved from stone, shoulders military straight. Father DeLuca's voice carried across the garden. "Dearly beloved." Janet watched from the kitchen entrance, making sure the champagne was ready. Angela's smile, as she took Bernardo's hand, was pure triumph. She'd won. She was untouchable now. The reception began at 6 p.m. Crystal chandeliers, candlelight on silk tablecloths. The city's elite negotiating deals between courses, discussing vacation homes in Tuscany and yachts in Monaco. Janet moved through the crowd with champagne flutes, invisible as always. At 7:15 p.m., Angela's hand clamped around Janet's bicep hard enough to bruise. Her face was flushed with champagne and malice. "You," she hissed. "I saw you looking at my husband." Janet's heart stopped. "Mrs. Lucchese, I wasn't. Don't lie to me." Angela's voice rose sharp enough to turn heads. "I've seen the way you watch him. Did you really think you had a chance? A little nobody like you." She grabbed the wine glass from Janet's tray. For one frozen second, Janet saw it coming. saw the arc the glass would make, saw the burgundy liquid suspended in air, saw her life splitting into before and after. The wine hit her face. Cold. Shocking. Soaking through her hair, her uniform dripping onto the white marble. 300 people went silent. Angela's voice rang across the ballroom. That's what happens when the help forgets their place. Someone laughed. Then another. The sound rippled through the crowd like a wave. Janet stood frozen, wine dripping from her chin, her hands still holding the tray. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear, to cease existing. But something else rose up from that 7-year-old girl who'd watched her father die for keeping secrets, a bone-deep exhaustion with making herself small. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stood there, bearing witness to her own humiliation without collapsing. What the hell is going on here? Bernardo's voice cut through the laughter like a gunshot. He stood in the ballroom entrance, having just finished greeting late arrivals. His face was stone, but his eyes blazed. Angela turned, her expression shifting to wounded innocence. Darling, I'm so sorry to make a scene at our reception, but this girl was being completely inappropriate, staring at you in a way that was honestly disturbing. Be quiet. 2 words. Soft as silk, deadly as poison. Angela's mouth snapped shut. Bernardo crossed the ballroom. 300 people parted like water. He stopped in front of Janet, and she forced herself to meet his eyes, even though wine was dripping down her face, even though she could feel everyone watching, judging. Janet, his voice was different than she'd ever heard it. Almost gentle. Are you hurt? She couldn't speak, could only shake her head. He turned to Angela. You threw wine on my employee. She was being inappropriate. In 6 months, Janet has been nothing but professional, efficient, and respectful. Each word came out harder. You, on the other hand, have terrorized my staff since the day you moved in. I overlooked it because I thought you'd settle down after the wedding. I was wrong. Angela's face went white. Bernardo, what are you? This marriage is over. The words detonated like a bomb in the silence. Someone gasped. Angela stumbled backward, hand flying to her mouth. You can't be serious. We literally just got married. The marriage will be annulled. Bernardo pulled off his wedding ring and set it on the nearest table with a soft click. I will not spend my life with a woman who treats people like garbage because she can. I will not build a family with someone who thinks cruelty is entertainment. He turned to the priest. Father DeLuca, I apologize for wasting your time. Everyone else, the reception is over. Angelo, call Mrs. Scarfo a car. The ballroom erupted. Angela screaming, her father Victor shouting threats, guests pulling out phones to capture everything. Janet stood in the center of the chaos, still holding her tray, unable to process what was happening. Bernardo turned back to her. Janet, please go change. Take the rest of the night off. Paid. And I apologize on behalf of my household. What happened to you was unacceptable. Then he walked out of his own wedding reception, leaving 300 stunned guests and one hysterical bride behind. Janet didn't remember getting to the staff quarters. She sat on her narrow bed, wine-soaked uniform sticking to her skin, mind spinning. Bernardo Lucchese had just canceled his wedding, in front of everyone. Because of her. No, because of how Angela had treated her. The distinction mattered, but would anyone else see it that way? Angela wouldn't. Her father, Victor Scarfo, who controlled half the ports in New Jersey, definitely wouldn't. Janet had just become a problem, a target, a liability. The smart move was to resign immediately. Disappear before this got worse. She'd find another job. She always survived. There was a soft knock. Mrs. Hunter stood in the doorway, face carefully neutral. Mr. Lucchese wants to see you in his study. Janet's stomach dropped. Now. She followed Mrs. Hunter through the empty ballroom, where staff members were already clearing away the uneaten food, the untouched wedding cake, the remnants of a celebration that had imploded. The house felt haunted. Bernardo's study was dark-paneled, lined with books, dominated by a mahogany desk that had probably witnessed 1,000 deals and confessions. He stood by the window, looking out at the garden where he'd gotten married 3 hours earlier, still in his tuxedo pants and shirt, the jacket and tie discarded. He looked tired, human. Sit down, please. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. Janet sat, hands folded in her lap, heart hammering. He turned from the window. I owe you an apology. She blinked. Sir, I was aware Angela was treating you poorly. Mrs. Hunter mentioned it several times. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that it would resolve itself. He ran a hand through his hair. I was wrong. What happened tonight should never have happened. You should never have been put in that position. This is my house, my responsibility. I failed you. In 26 years, no one with power had ever apologized to Janet. The words didn't compute. I understand if you want to resign, he continued. I'll provide excellent references and 3-month severance. But I hope you'll stay. You're good at your job, Janet. Better than good. This house runs smoother with you in it. I'll stay, she heard herself say, if you're sure it won't cause problems. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. I think I can handle any problems that arise. She stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Lucchese, why did you really cancel the wedding? He was quiet for a long moment. Because how a person treats those who can't fight back tells you everything you need to know about their character. And I refuse to tie myself to someone without character, regardless of how strategically valuable the alliance might be. He met her eyes. You deserve someone to stand up for you. It should have happened sooner. Janet left his study with tears running down her face, but they weren't tears of humiliation anymore. She woke the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 texts from unknown numbers. All variations of the same question. Is it true? Did he really cancel the wedding for you? Are you sleeping with him? Mrs. Rodriguez called from Janet's apartment building. Honey, there are reporters outside. 3 of them with cameras. They keep knocking on doors asking about you. What's going on? Janet walked to her window and peeked through the curtain. A news van was parked across the street. A reporter was talking to her landlord. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered. You ruined my life, you bitch. Angela's voice was raw with hatred. You think you've won? You think he'll actually be with someone like you? You're nothing. You're garbage. And I will make you pay for this. The line went dead. Janet sat on her couch, Maya playing with blocks on the floor, oblivious to the fact that their lives had just become tabloid fodder. Mafia boss cancels wedding for Black Maid. Love triangle erupts at Lucchese Scarfo wedding. Who is Janet Miller? Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. This is Bernardo Lucchese. I'm sorry about the media attention. Security will be at your building within the hour to escort you and your daughter. Don't talk to reporters. Let me handle this. Within the hour, 2 men in dark suits appeared at her door. Professional, polite, terrifying. They walked Janet and Maya to her car, shielded them from cameras and shouting reporters. One drove them to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, while the other followed in a separate vehicle. The story exploded over the next week. Every tabloid, every gossip site, every news outlet ran variations of the same narrative. Powerful mafia boss falls for his maid. They used Janet's worst DMV photo, exhausted, unflattering. They used Angela's best red carpet shots, radiant, beautiful. The optics were brutal. The comments online were vicious. Homewrecker, gold digger. He'll get bored in a month. The racist ones were worse. Janet stopped reading after the first day. But there were other voices too. Good for him for standing up against abuse. That wine throwing was disgusting. Maybe he actually has principles. Those comments kept her breathing. She went to work. She cleaned. She stayed invisible. But everything had changed. The other staff members looked at her differently. Some with admiration, some with resentment, some with fear of being associated with her. And Bernardo was dealing with business consequences. She overheard phone calls, tense conversations in Italian. Victor Scarfo was furious. The alliance was broken. There would be territorial disputes, possible violence, all because he defended her. Janet tried to resign 3 times. Each time, Bernardo refused. This isn't about you, Janet, he said one evening when she brought him coffee in his study. This is about the fact that I almost married someone who would have made my life miserable. The business problems will resolve themselves. They always do. But 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, things escalated. Janet was leaving work at 9 p.m., walking to her car in the estate's parking area, when a black SUV pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. 3 men she didn't recognize. One leaned out. "You Janet Miller?" Her security escort was 10 feet away, reaching for something under his jacket, but the man in the SUV was faster. "Tell your boss the Scarfo family doesn't forget disrespect. Tell him this is just the beginning." The window rolled up. The SUV drove away. Janet's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get her keys out of her purse. That night, Bernardo called her into his study. "Pack a bag," he said without preamble. "You and your daughter are moving into the estate. Guest wing, 2nd floor. Full security. Non-negotiable. Mr. Lucchese, I can't. You can and you will." His voice softened. "Janet, you're in danger because of a choice I made. I won't let anything happen to you or Maya. Please, let me protect you." What choice did she have? The guest wing was larger than their entire apartment. 2 bedrooms, a living area, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. Maya was delighted, running from room to room, exclaiming over everything. Janet was terrified. Living in the estate changed the dynamics entirely. She saw Bernardo in the mornings now, not as her employer, but as, what? Her protector? The man whose decision had turned her life into a battlefield? He was kind to Maya, which surprised Janet. He'd bring her little gifts, a stuffed animal, a coloring book, a cookie from the kitchen. Maya called him Mr. Bear because she couldn't pronounce Bernardo. It made him smile, this man who supposedly terrified the criminal underworld. Late one November evening, about 3 weeks after she'd moved in, Janet found him in the library nursing whiskey, staring at nothing. He looked exhausted. "Bad day?" she asked quietly. "Scarfo's pushing into my territory in Hoboken. 2 of my businesses were vandalized last night." He took a drink. "There's going to be retaliation. It's going to get ugly." She sat down across from him. "I'm sorry this is all because—" "Don't." He cut her off. "Don't apologize for existing, Janet. Don't apologize for being the victim of someone else's cruelty. This is on Angela and her father, not on you." "But if you just what? Let her humiliate you?" Stayed quiet and invisible and grateful for scraps. His eyes were intense. "You deserved better than that. Everyone deserves better. Even maids?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Especially maids. Especially housekeepers. Especially the people society tells us don't matter." He set down his glass. "My father used to say that how a man treats the powerless reveals his true nature. I forgot that for a while. You reminded me." Something shifted between them in that moment. Something dangerous and complicated and impossible to name. "Tell me about yourself," he said suddenly. "Not Janet the housekeeper. You. Who are you?" So she told him. About foster care. About Maya's father disappearing. About working 3 jobs while pregnant. About giving birth alone. About sleeping in her car during that terrible winter when she couldn't make rent. About the fear that never quite went away because she knew how quickly everything could fall apart. He listened without interrupting, without pitying, just listening. And when she finished, he shared his own story. About his father dying when he was 25, leaving him an organization he wasn't ready for. About the violence he'd witnessed, the choices he'd made, the people he'd lost. About feeling trapped in a life he'd inherited rather than chosen. "I was going to marry Angela because it was strategic," he admitted. "Because it would strengthen the family, prevent bloodshed. I convinced myself that was enough. That duty was more important than happiness." "What changed?" Janet asked. "I saw who she really was. And I realized spending my life with someone who could throw wine in your face and laugh about it would be its own kind of hell. No amount of strategic advantage is worth that." It was almost midnight when Janet finally went back to her room, mind spinning, heart doing things it had no business doing. This was her boss. This was a dangerous man with a dangerous life. This was impossible. But over the next month, impossible started to feel inevitable. He started joining her and Maya for breakfast. Started asking her opinion on things, the menu, house renovations, business decisions. Started looking at her the way a man looks at a woman, not the way an employer looks at staff. Janet, try to maintain professional distance. Try to remember her place. But late one December night, she was reading in the library when he came in. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, about books and music and memories and dreams. And when he finally stood to leave, he paused by her chair. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "And after I say it, if you want to move out, if you want to quit, I'll make sure you have enough money to start over anywhere you want. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." Janet's heart stopped. "Bernardo, I'm falling in love with you, Janet." His voice was raw, honest. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when I saw how hard you worked without complaining. Maybe when Angela humiliated you and you stood there with wine dripping down your face, but you didn't cry, didn't beg, just maintained your dignity. But I'm falling, and I needed you to know." She should have said no. Should have protected herself, protected Maya. But she was so tired of being careful, of being scared, of settling for less because she didn't think she deserved more. "I'm falling too," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. And for the first time in her life, Janet felt like maybe she was allowed to have something good. The next morning, Janet woke up terrified. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. If this went public, the media would explode. The Scarfo family would have more ammunition. Every person who'd called her a gold digger would feel vindicated. But when she walked into the kitchen and saw him making pancakes with Maya, flour in his hair and a smile on his face, the fear receded. Not gone, but manageable. They kept it quiet at first. Professional during the day when other staff were around. But in the evenings, after Maya was asleep, they'd steal moments. Conversations in the library, walks through the garden, the slow building of something real. He was different than she'd expected. Gentle with Maya, patient with her fears, open about his life in ways she imagined he rarely was with anyone. He told her about the business, the difficult choices, the weight of responsibility. She told him about her dreams, going back to school someday, maybe becoming a teacher, giving Maya a better life. "You're already giving her a better life," he said one night. "She's loved, she's safe, she has a mother who'd do anything for her. That's everything." 3 months into their relationship, Angela tried one more time to destroy Janet. A lawyer called. Angela was suing her for alienation of affection, claiming Janet had seduced Bernardo and destroyed her marriage. Never mind that he'd called off the wedding because of Angela's behavior. Never mind that Janet had been nothing but professional until months after they'd separated. Angela was painting a narrative, evil temptress versus innocent victim. The lawsuit made national news. Janet's face was everywhere again. Maid sued by jilted bride. Lucchese love triangle gets legal. The comments were brutal. Even people who defended her started to doubt. Maybe she was a gold digger. Maybe she planned this. Janet sat in Bernardo's study, reading the legal documents, feeling the walls closing in. "She's going to win," she said numbly. "Even if we prove she's lying, people will believe her version. They want to believe it. Then we give them a different story." Bernardo took the papers from her hands. "We tell the truth. All of it. On our terms." 2 days later, they sat down for an exclusive interview with the New York Times. They told the real story. Angela's treatment of the staff, Bernardo's decision to end the engagement before it became a marriage, the months of distance before anything romantic developed. Janet talked about her life, her daughter, her fear of being seen as something she wasn't. The reporter was fair, balanced, skeptical in the right places. When the article ran, it was titled, "Power, Class, and the Price of Dignity Inside the Lucchese Miller Romance." The response was mixed. Some people believed them. Some didn't. But slowly, the narrative started to shift. Other people who'd worked for Angela came forward with their own stories of abuse. Photos emerged of her at parties, drunk and belligerent, screaming at staff. The perfect victim image cracked. The lawsuit was quietly dropped 6 weeks later. But the Scarfo family war continued. Vandalism, threats, territorial disputes that sometimes turned violent. Bernardo tried to shield Janet from it, but she wasn't naive. Men in his organization were getting hurt because he'd chosen principle over politics. One night in June, almost a year after the canceled wedding, Bernardo came home with blood on his shirt. Not his blood, someone else's. Someone who tried to ambush him leaving a business meeting. He was fine, he said. His security had handled it. But Janet saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of endless conflict. "End it," she said. "Make peace with Scarfo. Whatever it takes. The peace he wants requires me to leave you." Bernardo's voice was flat. "That's his price. Public humiliation for public humiliation. He wants me to reject you the way I rejected Angela." Janet felt like she'd been punched. "Then do it." "Janet, I'm serious." Tears were streaming down her face. "End this war. Protect your people. I'll survive. I always survive." He grabbed her hands. "No, I've spent my entire life making decisions based on strategy and duty and what other people expected. I'm not doing it anymore. We'll find another way to end this war, but I won't sacrifice you. I won't sacrifice us." And he didn't. It took 3 more months of negotiations, of tense meetings mediated by neutral parties, of compromises and concessions on both sides. But eventually, a treaty was reached. Territory was redrawn. Agreements were made. The Scarfo family kept their pride, and Bernardo kept Janet. The war ended on a Tuesday in September, almost exactly a year after the canceled wedding. That night, Bernardo took Janet and Maya to a small Italian restaurant in the Bronx, far from the spotlight, far from the mansion. Just 3 people sharing pasta and laughter. When Maya fell asleep on his shoulder in the car on the way home, Janet knew she'd found something she'd stopped believing existed, a family. A real one. But there was still one secret that hadn't surfaced. One truth Janet had buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. It came back 2 weeks later when a man in a gray suit appeared at the estate gates, asking to speak with Janet Miller. Security detained him, searched him, found nothing but a business card. Thomas Hunter, estate attorney. Mrs. Hunter's nephew. He'd been looking for Janet for 3 years. They met in Bernardo's study. The 3 of them. Janet, Bernardo, and this lawyer who looked at her like she was a ghost. "Your father was Jimmy Miller," Thomas Hunter said. Not a question, a statement. Janet's blood went cold. She hadn't heard her father's name spoken aloud in 19 years. Yes, he kept books for 5 crime families, managed their offshore accounts. When he was killed in 1998, those accounts, totaling approximately $47 million, became inaccessible. The passwords died with him. "I don't know anything about that," Janet said quickly. "I was 7 years old." "I know." Thomas Hunter opened his briefcase. "But your father was a careful man. He left something for you. A safety deposit box at Commerce Bank in Camden. The key was with my aunt, your father's sister. She died 6 months ago. In her will, she left instructions to find you and give you this." He slid a small envelope across the desk. Inside was a key and a handwritten note in her father's familiar script. "Baby girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I try to protect you. The box contains everything you need. Use it wisely. Use it to be free. I love you. Daddy." Janet's hand shook as she held the note. Beside her, Bernardo was very still. "I need to go to Camden," she said quietly. "I'll come with you," Bernardo said immediately. The safety deposit box at Commerce Bank contained 3 things: a USB drive, a leather-bound ledger, and a letter explaining everything. Jimmy Miller had been the accountant for 5 families, yes, but he'd also been an FBI informant, gathering evidence, building a case. When the families discovered his betrayal, they'd killed him. But not before he'd hidden the evidence. Names, dates, transactions, proof of decades of criminal activity in offshore accounts only he could access. The USB drive contained the passwords. The ledger contained the account numbers. Together, they were worth $47 million and enough evidence to bring down half the organized crime infrastructure in New Jersey. "He wanted you to have choices," Thomas Hunter explained. "You can turn this over to the FBI and walk away clean. You can access the money and disappear. Or you can do nothing and let it stay buried. It's your inheritance, your choice." Janet sat in the bank's private viewing room, her father's handwriting swimming before her eyes, and understood something she'd been too young to grasp at 7. Her father had died protecting her. He'd kept silent during his execution because talking would have made her a target. He'd hidden this inheritance knowing that someday, when she was old enough, strong enough, it would give her freedom. "What do you want to do?" Bernardo asked quietly. Janet looked at the USB drive, the ledger, the evidence that could destroy empires. Then she looked at Bernardo, the man who'd canceled his wedding to defend her, who'd risked a war to protect her, who'd chosen her over strategy and power and everything his world valued. "I want to do what my father would have wanted," she said. "I want to be free, and I want to make sure no one else's father gets killed for doing the right thing." She turned the evidence over to the FBI. All of it. The $47 million went into a trust for victims of organized crime, college funds for children who'd lost parents, housing for witnesses who'd testified, medical care for those who'd been hurt. She kept nothing but her father's letter. The news broke 3 months later. Massive FBI raids across 5 states, dozens of arrests, criminal enterprises dismantled. The source of the evidence was kept confidential, but word spread through certain circles. Janet Miller, the maid who'd been humiliated at a wedding, was Jimmy the accountant, Miller's daughter. The woman who'd brought down the biggest organized crime operation in 20 years. Victor Scarfo was arrested in the first wave of raids. So were 3 of his top lieutenants. The Scarfo family's power collapsed overnight. Angela called Janet one last time. "You planned this," she hissed. "From the beginning. You manipulated everything." "No," Janet said calmly. "I just stopped letting people like you make me feel small. Goodbye, Angela." She hung up and never heard from her again. Now it's been 2 years since that wedding reception, since wine dripped down Janet's face in front of 300 people, since her life split into before and after. Maya is 5 now, enrolled in private school, thriving. Janet finished her GED and started college classes online. Education, just like she dreamed. Bernardo proposed 6 months ago with a simple gold band. Nothing flashy, just a quiet question in the garden. "Will you marry me?" She said yes. They're getting married next month. Small ceremony, just close family and friends. No media, no spectacle. Just them, choosing each other, building something real. People still recognize Janet sometimes, still whisper when she walks by. That's the maid from the Lucchese wedding. Some say it with admiration, some with contempt. She's learned not to care. Mrs. Hunter retired last year. At her retirement party, she pulled Janet aside. "You know what I admire most about you," she said. "You never tried to be anything other than yourself. You just stood there in your truth and waited for the world to catch up." Janet thinks about that often. About standing in your truth. About refusing to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. About the moment you decide your dignity matters more than someone else's approval. That night in the ballroom, when wine ran down her face and 300 people watched, she made a choice. Not consciously, not deliberately, but she made it. She chose not to beg, not to cry, not to apologize for existing. She didn't know then that Bernardo was watching. Didn't know he'd cancel his wedding, that her life would transform. She just knew she was tired of being treated like she didn't matter. What she learned is this. Sometimes the moment that should break you is actually the moment that saves you. Sometimes the humiliation that should destroy you becomes the foundation for something stronger. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the beginning of the best part. Maya asked her last week why she kept the white uniform shirt from that night, cleaned but still faintly stained, hanging in the back of her closet. To remember, Janet told her. To remember that the worst moment of my life was actually the beginning of the best part. She's too young to understand now. But someday Janet will tell her the whole story. About the night her mother stood in a room full of people who saw her as less than and refused to believe them. About the man who saw her worth when she was invisible to everyone else. About choosing love over strategy, dignity over safety, truth over comfort. She'll tell her that your value doesn't come from how other people treat you. It comes from how you treat yourself when they're done. And she'll tell her about her grandfather, Jimmy Miller, the accountant who died protecting his daughter, who left her an inheritance that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with choice. Freedom, Janet has learned, isn't about having wealth or power. It's about standing in a room full of people who want you to be small and refusing to shrink. It's about a wine stain that wouldn't wash out and a woman who decided she'd rather stand tall than stay safe. It's about the moment you realize you deserve better and the courage to actually believe it. And that's how a maid became a queen. If you made it this far, you just experienced a story about dignity, power, and the moment you decide you deserve better. What was your favorite twist? Did you see Jimmy Miller's connection coming? Do you think Janet and Bernardo's love will last? Tell me in the comments right now. And if this story gave you chills, made you angry, or had you rooting for a woman who refused to stay small, you need to subscribe because next week's story is even more intense. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear that they deserve better, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, the wine stain washes out, but the moment you stand up for yourself, that changes everything. Thank you.